Your show will go live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Northwest Liberty News, picking the lock on the shackles of tyranny.
Machines are going to fail, and the system's going to fail.
The past is past, the future's now.
Don't look at me. I think these people are completely nuts.
Sometimes trouble just follows a man.
There is another organism on this planet that follows the same pattern. Do you know what it is? A virus.
Can't you stop your lips from flapping for 2 little minutes?
It's because I'm white.
I'm a man. I'm sensitive. I need to feel loved. I need to be desired.
I'm rapping that there's coming a big underground succession.
It's a question of methods. Everybody wants results, but nobody wants to do what they have to do to get them done.
And now, coming to you live from Kalispell, Montana, brought to you by Northwest Liberty News, it's Montana Gazette Radio with your host, James White. Okay, I'm your host, James White. We are live here, unscripted, coming to you from Kalispell, Montana. This is Montana Gazette Radio. It's the 13th day of November 2020. We so much appreciate you joining us here today on the broadcast. We have a great show today lined up, Freedom Friday. And for those of you that have followed my broadcast on other stations, other channels that I've done, EIV Radio and Northwest Liberty News, you're going to be familiar with my guest, Gene Pringle, who's on with me today. He is a walking encyclopedia when it comes to taxes and what the truth is about taxes and how sort of, I know it's going to shock you, but we're being scammed, we're being tricked, we're being conned. And it's pretty apparent once you actually look at what the truth says and what actually their own words. And people don't do that, though. They just voluntarily comply. And that's one of the things that's one of the reasons that we're in the shape we're in now in this country is because of that. At any rate, we're going to have Gene Pringle on here in just in a moment. We're going to bring him on the line. Always great to have him on. And the second part of the show, we're going to have Jordan Hall from Montana Daily Gazette. He's a pastor, actually out in Sidney, Montana, and he's going to be here to talk about Romans 13. As right now, you hear a lot of pastors apparently across the country are telling their flock to submit to a Joe Biden presidency because of Romans 13. So we're going to explore that and much more here on the broadcast today. Again, we so much appreciate you being here with us here on the show. This is the 13th day of November, and Gene Pringle is a smart guy. I don't know what else to say. We're going to bring him on here. We're going to talk about the tax situation. Now, some of you probably have not heard of Gene before. That's why we're going to cover probably some of the stuff that we've covered before on other broadcasts, but that's okay because we need to lay a foundation, and he will do that for you. And he has all of his facts in line, and I would encourage you to check his facts because they're valid. So we're going to bring him on the show without further delay. Gene Pringle, thanks so much for joining us here on Montana Gazette Radio. It's good to have you back on this format. It's your first time here on this particular show. Good to see you. Good to have you here.
Hey, good morning, and welcome to be back.
Yeah, it is. I had a little bit of a break there. I switched over from the old show to this show here and started doing this every day. And then I had oral surgery here last week, and it kind of threw me back a little bit. I was supposed to have you on last week, but that didn't work out. But we're just delighted to have you here and picking back up with the Freedom Friday. And the other companion to Freedom Friday is going to be Ron Gibson, who will be here next Friday. And we're going to alternate like we did before every other week with Gene one week and Ron Gibson the next week. And between the two of those fellas, I tell you, everybody that's listening, if you pay attention, you're going to get a college-level PhD education on what the real law is and who you really are as far as a person and who the government thinks you are. And that's why they're able to tax you and permit you and pretty much keep you under the tyranny of oppressive government. So with that being sort of the groundwork, Gene Pringle, thanks again for being here. Why don't you go ahead and I've said on my show, we'll just start here. I've said on my broadcast numerous times, and I think I even put it at the title of this broadcast, taxation is theft. I've made that comment numerous times. Taxation is theft. Let's kick this off, Gene. If you can, if you want to give us a little bit of background on yourself, that's great. But I'd like you to at least, if you could, not at least, but if you could start off, answer the question of why taxation is theft. Gene Pringle, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, well, thank you, James, and good morning, everyone. I know many of you probably that are tuned in have heard me before talking on the show. And I think just a basic understanding of where we're at on this is probably a good place to start. And first of all, if we're talking about an income tax, we have to consider the word income. And income is not everything that comes in. Income, so says the Supreme Court, is profit or gain derived from some activity, some privileged activity or business dealings. So it means profit or gain. It does not mean earnings from an occupation of common right. We have always had that right. That's part of being an American. We have the right to exist. This has been declared in the Declaration of Independence. I know that phrase, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We also have the right to own property. So when we take these rights and we want to exercise those rights, we have a government bureaucracy in place that wants to destroy those rights and ignore them and claim that, well, you received wages and wages are taxable. Well, I agree with that statement to a point. Wages paid for employment are taxable, but you have to look at the definition of employment in 26 U.S.C. 3121B. Before you can say, well, working for Joe's service station is employment, because it's not. It's an occupation of common right. And what you are earning is called earnings, not wages. So if we have earnings, then you have to discern what is or is not reportable on that tax return. Because what you're making an affidavit of truth in that tax return, because you are signing it and declaring under penalty of perjury that the foregoing is true, correct, and complete to the best of your knowledge and belief. That is testimony of a witness. So income tax return is the testimony of a witness. Well, when you fill that out and you fill it out properly and you do not declare your so-called wages that you were paid and what was reported on a W-2 to the IRS as wages, they do this, and this is where the con game starts at. Your alleged employer has you fill out a W-4. You don't read the instructions, so you just fill it out and you choose your exemptions that you want to claim, and they start taking withholding because you created the liability yourself. You voluntarily filled out a W-4 form, and you didn't fill it out exempt because you don't have a tax liability.
Hey, Gene, let me pause for a second. Let me pause for a second. I've said on this show many times what people don't really understand is when you get your first job at the corner store or at the restaurant as a busboy or wherever, working at the 7-Eleven, when you sit down on that very first day of work and you fill out all your tax documents, before you do that, you're not in the system. When you fill out your very first tax documents on your very first job and you start signing your name on these documents, what you've done is essentially you volunteered yourself into the system that's going to take a third of your wages until you die. That's pretty much what you've done. They don't tell you that you've done that when you sign that stuff. They don't tell you the ramifications and how much long-term financial hardship it's going to cost you if you don't pay your taxes. They don't tell you all that stuff when you fill out that first form. They don't. And I wish they would, because people are getting involved in these contracts, Gene, without the full knowledge of the impact of what's going to happen to them. I think they're not being honest and forthright when they make you sign these things. Do you see that as well?
Yes, I do. And this is the thing. If we don't ever stop and check this out and learn, you're never going to know the truth, because people can continually hornswoggle you into believing something that's not true. Let's look at the W-4. Go online to the IRS's website and look up Form W-4. Look up a W-2. Look up all these forms on there and download the instructions. So on the W-4 form, look at the instructions. The first portion, the upper left-hand side of the instructions, tells you what to fill out in order to file exempt. Why do you want to file exempt? If you do not have a liability for the tax, you don't owe any tax on your earnings. And incidentally, if you want to find out the definition of earnings, it's 28 U.S.C. 3002, number 6. That's the Federal Debt Collection Procedures Act. Why would they have a definition of earnings in the Federal Debt Collection Procedures Act? Why didn't they have it in the Internal Revenue Code? Well, how better to defraud you than to hide it someplace like the Federal Debt Collection Procedures Act? So when you look at the definition of earnings and understand that you have a right, your earnings can be called wages, salary, commission, bonuses, or otherwise. Well, how big of a truck can you drive through otherwise? And that's all called earnings. But now we can attach a label to it and say, oh, you were paid wages. Okay, whoopee. Was that wages for employment or wages for an occupation of common right? Now we have the controversy. So I want to get back to this 1040 form being the testimony of a witness, because this is critical for you to understand.
Go ahead.
So when you file that form with the Internal Revenue Service, you are testifying about what is or is not income to the best of your knowledge. So if you erroneously accept the W-2 from your employer, claiming that it's correct, then your employer paid you wages for employment. Now you look up these terms, and I'm telling you, you want to look up these terms in your state law also. Look up the term employment in your state law. Look up the term employer. See what they're defining these terms as, because it's super duper important. So when you file this document and the IRS says, well, we don't agree with your document and we've changed your 1040 form. Aha. Thank you very much, Mr. IRS. Because now you violated 18 U.S.C. 1512, that's tampering with a witness, victim, or informant.
Hold on for a minute. So since that document is...
Wait a minute. Okay. Let me finish this, because this is important. So 18 U.S.C. 1512, we look at B. Whoever knowingly uses intimidation, threatens, or corruptly persuades another person, or attempts to do so, or engages in misleading conduct towards another person with intent to. Now let's see what we have here, what the intent to involves. Influence, delay, or prevent the testimony of any person in an official proceeding. Let me ask you a question now. Think about this. Is filing a 1040 an official act?
I think it would be, since you signed it.
Aren't you filing it with the government?
I think it would be.
You're filing with a government agency.
Right.
And they want to withhold testimony or withhold a record, document, or other object from an official proceeding. They're trying to withhold your testimony, right? They're trying to make you change it, alter, destroy, mutilate, or conceal, or object with intent to impair the object's integrity or viability for the use in an official proceeding. Isn't a tax return an official proceeding? or otherwise obstructs, influences, or impedes any official proceeding or attempts to do so shall be fined in this title or in prison for not more than 20 years or both. Think about that, folks. All this time, they've been altering your returns, disagreeing with this or that, and it's your testimony. You're the only one who can fill out that return and sign it under penalty of perjury for your taxes. The same is true of any state tax return. You are testifying. But you've got other people out there that may be ignorant of the law. They don't know what they're talking about. They've never read the code. They don't read the regulations. They don't read court cases, but they make a report to the IRS and say they paid you wages. I'm going to give you a couple of excerpts here from our sister state to the north here called Washington State. This is from their Supreme Court. To the extent that the ordinance purports to impose a tax on the privilege of receiving pay for labor, such a privilege is not a valid basis for an excise tax. See Carey versus City of Bellingham, 41 Washington 2nd, 468. Held city's purported excise tax on a right to earn a living by working for wages is not a substantive privilege permitted by the state. It is one of those inalienable rights secured to all by the liberty, property, and happiness clauses of the national and state constitutions. See also Jensen versus Hennenford, 185 Washington 209 in 1936, rejecting the Washington State's Tax Commission argument that Personal Net Income Tax Act of 1935 could be characterized as an excise tax on the privilege of receiving income. My God, folks, what are we talking about here? Here's a state Supreme Court telling you in plain language that working for wages and earning a living is a common fundamental right, not some kind of privilege doled out by the government. So now you go back to what we're talking about here, this concept that 1040 form or state tax form is a testimony. It's your testimony, and you are being a witness against yourself. How does that pass Fifth Amendment muster?
It doesn't. You incriminate yourself. You almost open yourself to be incriminate yourself.
If you are unintentionally falsely testifying, whether it's unintentional or intentional, you are witnessing against yourself. Don't you think you ought to tell the truth? You tell the truth by starting with the truth. We have to get to the truth.
Well, Gene, if you don't fill that stuff out, they'll just send you a tax bill anyway. They estimate your taxes and send it to you anyway. I know, happened to me. After I started going after CPS,
well, if you fill out a truthful return and it says to put all your wages or income in this box, what are you going to put in that box?
0.
Absolutely. Put 0 because you didn't receive any taxable wages. You received earnings from an occupation of common right. But because you filled out a W-4 exemption certificate, they're taking withholding from your pay because you volunteered. Every quarter, before the end of each quarter, you can change a W-4. So before the next quarter is up, first quarter starts with January. January the 1st is the beginning of the first quarter. You can put in that W-4, amended W-4, and fill it out correctly to claim exempt because you don't owe a tax on your earnings.
Well, there was brought up here. It was brought up here
that stops the employer from legally withholding from your pay. If the IRS attempts to change that back to 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever your exemptions were and take money from your paycheck, that is witness tampering. It's evidence tampering. They're interfering with your right to receive 100% of your pay.
I think that I've never heard that argument. I've had a lot of people on this show talk about tax stuff before, Gene, you included, Ron, many people, and I've never heard that point brought up before, that's witness testimony when you fill that form out, and if they alter it, they're altering witness testimony, which is unlawful. I haven't heard it put that way before, but it was brought up here in the chat room, and I have to agree. How do we get around the fact that, I mean, the whole thing is a fraud, Gene. The whole thing is a con because the IRS and many other government agencies are all private corporations. Family courts are private corporations.
Okay, well,
your city's private corporation.
I don't care if they're private corporations or not. Let's not get off the subject here. That's another deep well that you don't need to get involved in.
Fair enough.
Because calling something a corporation, every government is a body politic and a body corporate. Let's get over it. They can act as a corporation, but can they come to you and say, okay, I'm going to treat you as a corporation because I feel like it? You'll pound sand in a rat hole. That's arguments for idiots, what I call it.
I don't think that's...
let's get back to the law. Let's go right to the law.
I think you misunderstood what I was saying. That's fine.
CFR, Part 31, 3121B-3. This is right in the regulations, okay? And remember, for tax purposes, regulations govern. That's stated by the United States Supreme Court, so I guess we can take it to the bank. So let's start with B, services performed within the United States. Services performed after 1954 within the United States, see 31.3121E-1. That's where you're going to find a definition of United States for tax purposes. People, you got to wake up and read the law. Stop listening to these BS artists who want to sell you out and send you down the river. Get a grip. Read the law. So by an employee for his employer, unless specifically accepted by Section 3121B, constitute employment. I'm impressed. Now let's go down to sub C. Services performed outside the United States, in general, except as provided in paragraphs C2 and 3 of this section. Services performed outside the United States, see 31.3121E-1, do not constitute employment. Is that plain enough for you, or do you need a picture? Would it need to be wall to wall, or can you just do a small one? What we're doing is we're being fed a bunch of pablum, and we're just sucking it up. Some so-called CPA gets up and says, oh, everybody's a taxpayer. Oh, I'm impressed. So if you buy a gallon of gas, are you a taxpayer? Of course, because you paid the taxes on the gallon of gas in order to put it in the tank into your car. But did you have to file a return because you bought gas? Because you paid some taxes? No, they're excise taxes. They put it on the price of the gasoline. It's added to it. Almost $1 a gallon in most places. But so we have a right to earn a living. We have a right to exist. We have a right to do these things. Putting a tax on that right would be a direct tax on property and would be unconstitutional. So did the 16th Amendment create some hitherto unknown form of taxation, a so-called direct non-apportioned tax? That's the biggest crock of crap I've ever heard in my life. There's no such thing as a direct non-apportioned tax. It doesn't meet constitutional muster. I don't give a crap what your pedigree is. You can call yourself judge, attorney, CPA, tax accountant, whatever you want. If you make that claim, you're lying to the people.
Hey, Gene, let's pause
and
for...
if you're a judge, you should be off the bench in a heartbeat. And if you're an attorney, you should be disbarred. If you're a CPA, you should be fired for incompetence.
Let's define...
There is no such thing under the Constitution of the United States as a non-apportioned direct tax.
Well, let's clear up what a direct and indirect tax is. For example, if you have a tax on cigarettes and you don't want to pay that tax, then you don't buy the pack of cigarettes, and therefore you're not liable for that tax. That's different.
Exactly.
That's different than them saying you owe the IRS $5,000 in back taxes or something. There's a difference between those two. Can you explain that direct and indirect real quick, so put everybody on the same page with that?
Yes, direct taxes apply to the exercise of rights or ownership of property. Excise taxes are on the happening of an event or some privileged activity, like working for the government. That's why the income tax is an excise tax. It falls under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. If you look at the constitutional authority for the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, you'll find it boldly stated by Congress. It's Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. That has to do with duties, imposts, and excises. What are duties? They're taxes on imports. We don't tax exports. And the other there are excise taxes. Those are taxes on privileges. They're synonymous with the privilege tax. So if you're engaged in some privileged employment, can you think of any privileged employment in your state? Let's see, we have several instances. One's called alcohol, the other's called tobacco, the other's called firearms, and the other's called explosives. Explosive taxes are all enforced by BATF. So are alcohol taxes. So are firearms taxes. Alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, right? Explosives are enforced by Department of Justice. Alcohol, tobacco, and firearms are ATF or BATF. Look at the IRS uniforms when they go out on a raid and see what it says on the back of them. You'll see it's a BATF raid. But the key is that these excise taxes are called privilege taxes. But what about a right to earn a living? Can you put an excise tax on a right to earn a living? The answer is absolutely not, because you convert it from an excise tax into a direct tax on property. Your labor, so says the Supreme Court, is your most sacred property. Butchers Union Company versus Crescent City Company. So there's all kinds of cases out there that'll tell you this. So as long as you can go along and believe something that's not true, then the government can get away with defrauding you of your most sacred property, your labor. And that's what we have. We have a criminal cabal operating our government.
That's right. That's right. Well, Gene, we're going to take a quick commercial break here. Excuse me. It's the bottom of the hour here. We're going to take a quick commercial break. We come back on the other side. We're going to continue to move forward on this, folks. There's a lot of, this is a technical thing, folks. There's a lot of different statutes and a different, legal type of notations that Gene's going to be making here. You can certainly write that down and check it for yourself. But here's the thing. It's probably one of the biggest frauds ever perpetrated on people in the history of the planet is this whole tax thing, where they've really turned your wages around and your right to make a living into they've monetized it for themselves. So we're going to talk about that and other things. We'll get back on the other side. Gene, before we go to break, do you want to give out any websites, anywhere where people can find out more about you, any email addresses or anything like that before we go to this first break?
Uncommonconsultant.org is my website. There's a lot of information posted there, which we try to get as much information out to the people as we possibly can.
Uncommonconsultant.org. I'm typing that in right now in the chat room, folks. You can go there and you can, I don't know, Gene, if you have a question and thing there, but I know certainly people that are having issues, they can hire you to look over their stuff and help them get through their tax issues. I know that's a service that you provide. So, Gene's going to be a guest every other week, folks. So if you can support Gene and his work, that'd be great. That helps him, helps me, helps the whole network, and helps get the word out, which is really what we want to do. So we're going to take a quick commercial break here, and we get back on the other side. We're going to be rejoined back once again by our friend Gene Pringle. This is Montana Gazette Radio. I'm your host, James White, on this 13th day of November. We'll be back after these brief messages. If you like classic cars, exceptional service, and a money-back guarantee, then the Corner Shop in beautiful downtown Kalispell is the place for you. Whether it's an oil change, engine diagnostic, suspension work, or brakes all around, the Corner Shop has you covered. With expert technicians and a free consultation on all services, you can't go wrong with the Corner Shop. Did I mention the classic cars? While you're waiting for your expert service to be performed, take a stroll through the showroom to see Kalispell's smoothest collection of classic cars. The Corner Shop is conveniently located at 1212 South Main, just south of the courthouse. The Corner Shop is open Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. till 5 p.m., so drop by for an appointment or call 755-7777. That's 755-7777. The Corner Shop, Kalispell's full-service auto repair facility.
PatriotPrepared.com carries the leading brands of storable food from Legacy and Heaven's Harvest. Patriot Prepared. Our name says it all. We're dedicated to empowering you to be self-reliant and confident in any circumstance. Whether you want to be prepared in the event of an emergency or you're an outdoor sports enthusiast, PatriotPrepared.com has prepackaged meals and kits for your entire family. Legacy, Heaven's Harvest are known for high-quality, great-tasting, GMO-free, nutritious food with no chemical preservatives. Simple to prepare, easy to store, gluten-free and organic high-quality nutrition options with a 25-year shelf life. You can't beat the feeling of being food secure when you need it most. So go to PatriotPrepared.com right now to pick up your supply of high-quality storable food for your family, because it makes good sense to be prepared. That's PatriotPrepared.com.
Okay, folks, if you want to support this broadcast, you can support this broadcast by going to our sponsors and supporting our sponsors. That certainly helps us here, especially PatriotPrepared.com. All of the purchases there from PatriotPrepared.com directly benefit this broadcast. If you want to support us that way, that'd be great. If otherwise, you can go to the flagship Northwest Liberty News and click on the Support Independent News button there. Please visit our websites, montanadailygazette.com, montanadailygazette.com, northwestlibertynews.com. We so much appreciate that. We're joined here. We're going to be bringing Gene Pringle back on the line with us, income tax expert who really points out the fraud, the con that we've been living under really ever since you started paying taxes. When you went in and signed that first tax form right there, the con began, and they continue to con you really throughout your whole entire life, sadly. I want to, there's a question here actually in the chat room here, and I want to bring Gene on. Gene, hey Gene, thanks for holding on after the break. We appreciate that. If people have issues with the IRS, like someone here just stated in the chat room that they had some stock trades and the IRS came after them and inflated what they owed them and trying to pull some shenanigans, it sounds like. These people can go to uncommonconsultant.org and they can hire you to. I mean, you write letters to the IRS, and you help people respond back to the IRS when they start trying to unlawfully come after people's earnings, right? I mean, you do write letters and you help them with that. Is that accurate, Gene?
Yes, we help people as best we can. Sometimes they wallow themselves into a hole that's very difficult to dig out of. But you have to start at some point. And when you're dealing with an agency that wants to disregard everything you say, you have to put them on the spot. And the way we do that is by using the law to our advantage. So, yes, you go to the website. You can contact us by email through the website. Send an email. Talk about your problem. Explain what's going on. Tell us about it. And give us the phone number or contact information on the website, and we will reach out and get back to you.
Tell me if you can, Gene. Go ahead. Okay,
let's get right back into the topic here, because there's so much information here that we really want to get to people so that they can prepare and understand the truth.
Sure, go right ahead.
And I want all of you to start thinking right now about the taxing clauses of the United States Constitution. This is so important. Let's go to Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3. Representative and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states which may be included within this union, according to their respective numbers of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, and excluding Indians not taxed, 3/5 of all other persons. That clause was changed a little bit after the Civil War and took out the reference to the 3/5 of all other persons, which referred to slaves that were no longer slaves. Let's go to the next clause, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. These are the three kinds of taxes to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. But all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. Okay? I want you to think about the word uniform. When you look at your state constitutions, look at the taxing authority and see if it says equal and uniform or just says uniform. Now we go to the next clause, Article 1, Section 9, Clauses 4 and 5. No capitation or the direct tax shall be laid unless in proportion to the census or enumeration hereinbefore directed to be taken. Now ask yourself a question. Do we still take a census every 10 years?
I think we still do, yeah.
Of course we do. What was its primary purpose? It's to proportion direct taxes. Right. It's also used to determine different
congressional districts. Right, congressional districts.
Right. Okay. No tax or duty shall be laid on articles exported from any state. There can be no export duty on articles leaving one state and going into another state. That's interstate commerce, and you cannot have taxes laid on interstate commerce. So now we go to the 16th Amendment. And it says the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived without apportionment among the several states and without regard to any census or enumeration. 16th Amendment. Is there any language there that amends Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3? Is there any language there that amends Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1? Is there any language there that amended Article 1, Section 9, Clauses 4 and 5? No, there's not.
No, he's going to say no.
So it was not the intent of Congress to amend anything. It's exactly what the Supreme Court has said. The 16th Amendment did not amend any provision in the Constitution. All those taxing clauses are still intact. The 16th Amendment only took the income tax out of its category of direct and placed it into indirect where it inherently belonged. Brushaber versus Union Pacific Railroad, a 1916 case. But we have attorneys and judges out there saying, oh, the 16th Amendment amended the Constitution. It created a direct non-apportioned tax. It did no such a damn thing. And any attorney or a judge who says that it did should be removed from the position that he holds. So the first thing we have to get over here is all of the misrepresentation and lies that are being produced by the government and those who claim that they're acting on behalf of the government. So if you look at excise taxes, are those laid upon the manufacture, sale, or consumption of commodities within the country, upon licenses to pursue certain occupations, and upon corporate privileges. It's exactly what the court said about the definition of income. It means the same thing that it meant in the corporate excise tax of 1909. It means gains, profits, and income derived from some privileged activity. And that's Flint versus Stone Tracing Company, 220 U.S. 107. Indirect taxes can be avoided or passed on. It's an excise tax. If you don't want to pay the tax, don't engage in the activity. If you don't want to pay the tax on cigarettes, don't buy cigarettes. If you don't want to pay the taxes on booze, don't drink. The tax on alcohol is $13.50 on each proof gallon or portion thereof.
Gene,
indirect taxes can be avoided. That's why they call them indirect. They're not direct taxes.
We got a quick question from the chat room. Do you help
Sure,
people?
go ahead.
Do you help people remove lien letters? Is that something you do for your? Do you help with
Yeah. So if somebody in the Internal Revenue Service decides to put a lien on your property, what's the basis of the lien? What was the activity that you engaged in that allegedly created the liability? Did you ever ask them for that? A plain statement of the basis in law and factual situation that gave rise to the liability? Maybe you should start there. Folks, we're being hornswoggled, bushwhacked, lied to, cheated and stole from.
Do you want me to open up? Do you want me to open up the phones for calls? I think people may want to call in, and if do you want me to open up? There's just some things you want to cover, Gene.
Sure.
You want to open up the phones?
Calls.
Okay, folks.
I think we've covered the main things here. The people have to understand what this is all about. It's about falsifying testimony. If somebody can extort you into changing your testimony, when you make that 1040 tax return, you are testifying. It's a legal document. You're testifying under penalty of perjury that what you put into that document is the truth.
It's true. Yep.
So if you don't know the true meaning of income versus earnings, how can you testify to the truth from ignorance?
563-999.
You're being forced into waiving your rights, and the government hasn't got that power.
563-999.
Yeah, if you want to open up the calls, that'd be great.
Yeah, 563-999-3617. 563-999-367 if you want to call in, and 3617 if you want to call in and ask Gene a question. Of course, the rules of the chat room are the same as they always are. You don't have to agree with me or Gene. Just be respectful. Don't be abusive, and we don't use profanity here. So please, refrain from doing that. Looks like we got a call that's jumped on already, Gene. I think some people wanted to call in, so let's take the caller, and then after the callers, if we have a gap in between calls, I want you to answer when you get a summons. You've explained to me before that just because you get a summons doesn't mean you have to answer it. There's got to be some sort of a judge's order or something behind that. I don't remember exactly the specifics, but we can cover that if we have any more downtime before the end of the show. So let's bring the caller on. Caller, thanks for joining the show. You're live on the air. Please state your first name and where you're calling from.
Hi, this is Sandra. I'm calling from Michigan. And I want to thank you, Jim, and thank you, Gene. If the IRS sends you a letter and says that you owe money from 9 years ago, almost 10 years ago, do you have to pay that? I'm calling for someone else. I don't remember what it was for. I think it was they undercharged them taxes or something. But after that long, do you still have to pay it?
Well, there's a statute of limitations that they have to use, and the statute of limitations applies to the IRS and all their agents just like it applies to anyone else. And 10 years after the fact is a little late. It's past the statute of limitations.
Okay, so would something have to be filed, Gene? Would you just have the person file some sort of a form to let them know, or just write a letter, or how does that work?
The first thing to do is to challenge them on their claim. And in doing so, if they're claiming something that was back that long ago, I would say that due to the fact that you've delayed this request for so many years, if there's something wrong with the filing I did at that time, I reserve the right to amend that filing.
Sure.
And folks, this opens a kettle of worms. This is fraud, and fraud vitiates everything it entered into and goes back to the original act. So what was the original act? The original act was the 13th Amendment and the so-called direct non-apportioned income tax. That's a fraud. And it's been used to hornswoggle the American people into paying this outrageous amount of money to the government that's done nothing but waste it. Look at the battles we have every year for people to get into Congress, which is the most corrupt institution in the world. They're in there buying each other off and patting them on the back, getting all these kickbacks and stuff. Now we have kickback Biden as the president-elect. You get what you voted for, folks.
Does that answer? Go ahead, caller. Go ahead.
Is there any repercussions if you don't pay that? If you say, "Listen, it's been too long," and this and that, well, can they like?
Absolutely, there are repercussions if you don't pay it. They're making an accusation. If you don't rise up to the accusation and do something about it, then they're gonna go in and seize property. They'll get a levy against you. They'll go and take your property, do all kinds of stuff. But when you stand up for your rights and fight back, especially when you use the law as it's written for that battle, you stand a much better chance of winning.
So well, thank you. I appreciate that information. I'll pass that on.
Caller, have your friend go to uncommonconsultant.org, uncommonconsultant.org, and they can reach out to Gene. Thanks so much, caller, for calling in.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, Gene. Yeah, they'll come after you. They will. They'll try to garnish your wages. They're a criminal cabal. They're like a mafia. They really are. They're like a mafia. That's what they are.
If you want to find out the truth about garnishment, you go read the Federal Debt Collection Procedures Act. That's in 28 U.S.C. 3001, all the way over to I think it's 3006, or I'm sorry, 3406. But go read that, look it up, and read that act, and look at garnishment in 3104. Do you know that earnings are not subject to garnishment? But if you call them wages, they'll take them.
Well,
but they can't garnish your earnings without a court order. What's going on, folks?
Well, that's my question. Court order.
It ain't so much, a great philosopher said one time, it ain't so much what you don't know that caused you so much trouble. It's what you know that ain't so. Keep that thought in mind.
Yeah, right on. Well, you get a summons in the mail to appear in court. There's no, you don't even have to go to that. I know you don't even, you blow them off. I don't think you even go to yours when they give you summons, right, Gene? Doesn't the summons have to be?
No, I do not.
They want to, go ahead.
When you get an IRS administrative summons, an administrative summons is a summons signed by some internal revenue agent or whatever they want to give themselves, whatever title they want to claim. That is an administrative summons. The Supreme Court says that an administrative summons that's not supported by a federal court does not have to be responded to by anyone. So the key here is don't start answering those summonses and start telling people or giving these people what they want. I tell them to go to court, go to federal court, open up a case, go in and talk to the judge and get your summons supported by a federal court order. Then I'll be happy to bring my books and records and come down and talk to you. But there's no law that can compel me to produce those records into the court. I can bring them with me to the court. They're going to be in a cardboard box, but you'll play hell getting that box opened. I don't have to show them to anyone under Fifth Amendment protections.
That's right, and that's something that's really lost. When that whole right to non-incriminate yourself, they just blow right through that, don't they? The whole Fifth Amendment means nothing to these people. They don't even. Because
until you exert it, and you can't do a blanket exertion. You have to do each question. You have to stand on your Fifth Amendment rights. Go back to the Lois Lerner hearings in Congress. What did she testify to? Absolutely nothing. Was she punished? No, she got promoted.
Yeah, it's true.
How dumb can we be, folks? We can watch it on national television, And nobody gets it because we're listening to some idiot guru out here just blowing smoke up our fannies.
Well,
talking about something that doesn't mean anything.
So what are we've got about 10 minutes left here. Actually got about 8 minutes left here, Gene, on this show. What type of remedy? We got another call that came in. What can people do here? Well, I'll tell you what, let's take this call real quick. And then what we'll do is we want to give some people some remedies. Like, if we know it's crooked and we know we're being fleeced, there's got to be some sort of way to stop it. Right? There's got for the average person. If you don't have even, without big deep pockets for big corporate attorneys, there's got to be some remedy for the average guy and gal to be able to go up against these scoundrels. But we'll talk about that after we take this quick phone call here. Caller, thanks.
Sure, go ahead.
Caller, thanks for joining us here. You're live on the air. Please state your first name. It looks like you're from Montana, and what city in Montana you're calling from.
Yes, it's Elena, and I'm calling from Phillipsburg.
Hello, Elena. How are you today? Thanks for calling into the show.
Pretty good. I think with the two conversations before with your guests, the key word is federal court. Because when you get involved with the IRS, they love to invite you to their tax court. And that's where you get screwed royally. So always keep in mind, if there's any complaints, you go to the district court, the federal court. Never go to tax court. Am I correct?
Gene, you're going to comment on that?
Well, tax court is one of the steps that you can take. But if you go into tax court, you have to make the correct argument. When any court, you have to make the correct argument, and it all starts with liability for the tax. Has anybody ever come up and said, this is the statute and its regulation that makes you liable for the income tax?
Well, a tax court is an unconstitutional court. It's
Well,
just like family court and all the rest of them. They're unconstitutional courts.
You got
So
some proof of
even
that?
if you have the right argument, you should go to the federal court, the district court. I've gone through this, and I know what I'm speaking about too.
Well, and that's all well and good. That's all well and good. And the tax court was created by Congress, and it is a constitutional court under Congress's authority. So I think here again, we're getting away
even
from
the IRS wasn't. Even the IRS wasn't created by Congress. Okay, that's our problem, right there. The IRS isn't created by Congress.
Well, our problem is going into a court and making the wrong argument.
So, but and here's something advice: always ask questions. Never.
That's what I'm trying to get to is asking questions. And the first question is
that's
liability.
Right. Always ask them questions, and they always.
You need to have that caller. You need to get that caller on your show, James.
Yeah, well,
sounds like
thank
you've
you
got
very
the remedy
much for
for
what
everything.
you do.
Okay, well, thanks,
like
thanks
I
so much.
said, continue to feed the beast, and this is the government we get, and they're really out of hand right now. Thank you for everything.
Thanks, caller. I appreciate you calling in. Yeah, we'll well, Gene, there's a lot of as you stated before, there's a lot of different, there's a lot of information out there. I'm sure some of it's probably true and some of it's probably not true. And people, if they believe it, I'm sure it's with good intentions because there is a lot of misinformation and disinformation. So what can people do in the last couple of minutes we got here left? And we'll have you back in a couple of weeks and we'll explore something different, of course. In the last couple of minutes, what's the first step that a person can do to start getting a remedy? I know it's not something that's like a magic bullet that you can sign your letter on a form and sign your name on a form and everything goes away. What's the first step for people to do to start extracting himself from this from the system?
The first thing you have to do is ascertain where you're at and what you're doing. Have you been filing tax returns? Have you been filing truthful tax returns? Have you been avoiding the tax by doing some clever things? There's things that you can do that are called tax avoidance, but if you evade the tax, that's a crime. But first of all, you have to be made liable for something before you can evade it. We're making the wrong arguments by talking about the amount of the tax. What we want to talk about is the liability issue. And the first thing you want to do is to compel the government to establish the statute and regulation that makes you liable for the tax. So This is the first thing that I do in any kind of demand letter that you send into the government. You have to start with the issue of liability for the tax. They're calling it an income tax. Can that income tax, which is a privilege tax, be exerted against your right to exist? The answer is absolutely not. But they're going to do that and get away with it because they claim that you were paid wages. It's a vicious cycle. But in order to break that cycle, you have to cut the wire. You have to cut the lifeline. You have to get in there and force a wedge into that issue. And that wedge is called liability. Compel them to state what statute and regulation makes you liable for this alleged tax. And I can tell you, they won't ever jump into that. And on that basis, you will win. So if they can't prove in court that you are made liable, there's no basis for what they're claiming.
Okay, Gene, we got to just, in this last couple of minutes here, why don't you go ahead and give out your websites again and let people know what kind of stuff are we going to be talking about here as we move forward. We're going to have you on again here in a couple of weeks. What kind of stuff are we going to be talking about as we move forward here on this interview series? What type of topics are we going to cover? We're just going to basically empower people to go up against these crime bosses at the IRS. I know that's the short answer, but if you want to go in more detail, go right ahead before we have to close out the show.
Yes, well, certainly. What I'm trying to do is to instill in people the concept that we can operate from the basis of truth and fact, and we can actually win in court. So this is what we're doing through Uncommon Consultants. We're helping people to look at the law and understand the plain language of the law and use it to our advantage. And the first thing that we want to do is demand clarity from the IRS. Demand that they produce a statute and regulation that makes us liable for the tax. Don't just point a finger at me and claim that I owe a tax. The Supreme Court says that when the government puts its finger on the citizen, it must also put its finger on the law that permits it. Well, it's about time we started demanding that they put their finger on the law. And if you can't point to the law when you open the court case and say this is the law that makes you liable for the tax and you failed to pay, they don't have a case. Move for dismissal for failure to state a claim. Stop listening to these people that want to blow smoke and, make a lot of smoke and no fire.
Gene, we're just out of time, brother. Uncommonconsultant.org, uncommonconsultant.org. Gene Pringle, so much appreciate all your great work and the lively discussion and the phone calls, and we're looking forward to having you back here in 2 weeks. We'll have you back here on the show again. Thanks so much, my friend.
All righty. Thank you.
Appreciate it, brother.
Looking forward to it.
Okay, take care, man. Bye now.
All right.
Okay, folks, there goes Gene Pringle, the one and only. We appreciate him being on the broadcast. Appreciate the phone calls, the lively discussion. And, if you want to check out more about what he's got going on, uncommonconsultant.org. We're going to take a quick commercial break here. We come back on the other side. We're going to have J.D. Hall here talking about Romans 13. Don't want to miss it. Be back after these brief messages here on Montana Gazette Radio.
PatriotPrepared.com carries the leading brands of storable food from Legacy and Heaven's Harvest. Patriot Prepared. Our name says it all. We're dedicated to empowering you to be self-reliant and confident in any circumstance. Whether you want to be prepared in the event of an emergency or you're an outdoor sports enthusiast, PatriotPrepared.com has prepackaged meals and kits for your entire family. Legacy, Heaven's Harvest are known for high-quality, great-tasting, GMO-free, nutritious food with no chemical preservatives. Simple to prepare, easy to store, gluten-free and organic high-quality nutrition options with a 25-year shelf life. You can't beat the feeling of being food secure when you need it most. So go to PatriotPrepared.com right now to pick up your supply of high-quality storable food for your family, because it makes good sense to be prepared. That's PatriotPrepared.com.
Have you heard of Protovite? The most common health concern today is poor digestive health. Unlike ordinary supplements, Protovite is a liquid multi-nutrient formula with patent-pending absorption technology. A published scientific study proves that Protovite is nutrition that gets in 100% of the time. Protovite uses the highest quality ingredients to rapidly nourish every cell in your body.
My name is Sandra. 6 weeks ago, when I started taking Protovite, I was on 14 medications, from everything for blood pressure to fibromyalgia. In the first 10 days, my blood sugar dropped 50 points, and my fibromyalgia pain is gone. And so was 12 of the 14 medications that I was taking.
Protovite, nutrition that gets in. Buy Protovite now.
Thank you, Protovite, for giving my life back.
These statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Work with your doctor when taking medications. Make Protovite part of your healthy lifestyle.
Okay, folks, if you want some of the highest quality liquid vitamin supplementation on the market, you can go to bloodboost.net. That's bloodboost.net, and check out what's going on over there. That helps support this broadcast, and all of the products there on bloodboost.net help boost your immune system, which is a key thing, especially with the winter months coming up. We appreciate Gene Pringle coming on and laying out the truth about the tax fraud that's being perpetrated on us daily. So I suggest you check out what he's got going on over at uncommonconsultant.org, uncommonconsultant.org. We're going to switch gears here a little bit. We're going to bring J.D. Hall on here from Montana Daily Gazette. We're going to talk about Romans 13. Let me pull him up here and bring him over here on the screen. J.D. Hall is a pastor out in hold on here. Let me bring this on. There we go, right there. J.D. Hall, thanks for joining us here. You're a pastor out there. I can't remember. I'm gapping on the name of the town you live in, Sydney, out in Sydney, Montana. And we're going to talk about Romans 13. The reason I want to have you on, my brother, is because we're getting a lot of pastors across the country now that are saying you need to submit to a Joe Biden presidency because of Romans 13. So if you could, first of all, JD, thanks for being here today on the show. We appreciate that. Always great to have you on. If you can, let us know, first of all, the Romans 13 that we're talking about, the verses we're talking about, and then let's get into the misconceptions. I know you've covered this quite a bit, quite extensively. J.D. Hall, thanks so much for joining us here today on Montana Gazette Radio.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jim. There are a lot of pastors who are quoting Romans 13 these days. I assume some are starting to do it, in regard to a Joe Biden presidency. What I've seen in recent days from pastors that has annoyed me has not been a citation of Romans 13, if I could chase a rabbit just for a moment, but it is their recollection to us that God is sovereign over all things. And the reason why that's a tad annoying is because I know that. We preach that. My church is Reformed, meaning that we believe that God micromanages his creation. You know, birds don't fall from the sky without God being in charge of that. And we do know that Romans 13 teaches that the authorities that exist have been instituted by God. But just because God is sovereign does not give us an excuse for slothfulness. When you believe in, say, for example, the doctrine of election, like I do, some people would say, well, what's the point of evangelism? And we would say, well, we want people to hear about the good news because it's God's intended plan to use men in his redemptive plan for other men. And so it doesn't mean that we don't tell people about Jesus because God's in control. Well, just because God is in control doesn't mean that you and I have abdicated our responsibilities on this earth to ensure that justice is done. And so we should be busy about that task. But to answer your original question in regard to Romans 13, Romans 13 teaches that, as I said, the powers that exist have been instituted by God, but it tells us to submit to every governing authority. And there's a parallel passage that's almost identical, written by a different author, inspired by the same God, of course, but that's 1 Peter chapter 2, which teaches something very similar to Romans 13, and that is, it is your responsibility to submit to the proper legal jurisdictional authorities, because a government is designed by God to punish wickedness and to praise goodness, and that's what both those passages teach us. However, it's mostly due to a surface level, shallow, sophomoric reading of those texts that then leads them to be summarized by people just as obey the government, which is more simplistic than what those passages read.
And I think that's a key point that, and isn't there, I mean, we're supposed to follow lawful government that is put in place lawfully. Seems to me the government we have right now, JD, is corrupt. I mean, President Trump notwithstanding, and the work that he's trying to do to, I think, take down these scoundrels, are we still subject to a corrupt government, even when evidence comes out that they are corrupt, like we see now with, the foreign dealings and the treason and everything? I mean, we need to take pause for that, do we not?
Well, before we get into whether or not our government is corrupt, I think we should ask the question exegetically: is that what the Scripture says at all? Does it merely say submit to the government? Period. And the word used in 1 Peter 2, for example, is katenos anthropinus in Greek, which means human ordinance or human organization. But the word in Romans 13 that's used for governing authorities is the word ekousia in Greek, not ecclesia, that means church, but ekousia. And that word ekousia means jurisdiction. And that's how the word is translated in Luke chapter 23, for example, as Jesus was taken to Herod to be tried by Herod because he was of Herod's jurisdiction. And so Romans 13 is presupposing that governments have jurisdictions. And there are differing jurisdictions in the Scripture, just as in the Old Testament there was the differing jurisdictions of or differing offices, jurisdictional offices of prophet, priest, and king. Those are three separate, offices with different oversights and authorities. And so, what we would believe as Orthodox Christians is that there is a government of men that we might call the magistrate. But there's the government of the church, in which Jesus is the head of the church, the ecclesia. And then there's the government of the home, in which the father and the husband is the head of that government. And feminists might rage at that, but that's the traditional Christian Orthodox understanding of the structure that God has intended for the home. And so the point is, those jurisdictions are separate. And so when the government, for example, with a mask mandate or because of COVID-19 says you can't worship, or if you do worship, here's how you worship. You can't sing when you worship because that's how germs are spread. We would say, well, that's great advice, Caesar. Appreciate your advice. You have no jurisdiction over the church whatsoever. There's a separation of church and state. And so that's a cool thought. But you have no say over that. Or in our home, if the government says you have to vaccinate your children, we would say, hey, neat theory you have. I'm the head of this home and I'm the father of my children. You're not. I am. And so you stay in your lane. And so the government should be doing things like providing for the common defense and building highways, roads and bridges. Not getting involved into the affairs of our life in terms of faith and affairs within our home to boss us around. And so when you look at somebody like Joe Biden and ponder the question, what is the limit that we Christians are supposed to have for, like, what's the wickedness threshold someone needs to cross before we say we're not following this anymore? Well, it's two things. Number one, if they ever tell us to do that which offends our conscience before God or would have us violate God's law, then we would respond as Peter and John did and say, you can decide for yourself whether or not you want to obey God or man, but for us, it's a settled matter. We will obey God rather than men. That's first. And secondly, we should be asking the question regarding every decree the government gives. Is this within their proper jurisdiction and authority? And I think we would look at the American government today and largely say they're acting well outside their lane of authority.
I know you don't know a person's heart and their mind, but are these pastors out there, the preachers that are out there saying you need to submit to a Joe Biden presidency? Is it your understanding? Like I said, I know you don't know their heart or their mind, but do you think they're coming by this honestly? Do you think they're just misinterpreting Scripture, or do you think, listen, if you don't think that there's pastors that are part of the deep state that are trying to further the New World Order agenda, then you're just not paying attention. Would you say largely, Jordan, these people are just misrepresenting Scripture, or do you think that they've got some other alternative motive? I mean, I know you don't know their mind and their heart. I know that.
Well, we can't know the mind or the heart, but Jesus said that we can judge a tree by its fruit.
Sure.
And I see pacifism growing within the church to a degree that's concerning. And I'm convinced that there's not very many doctrines contrived in the minds of men that's more offensive to God than that of pacifism. But the office of pastor has become very feminized in recent years, in the latter half of the 20th century. Now more than anything, what I hear is, you're a pastor and you're so outspoken. And that just really shocks me to even hear. It's like I'm on a different planet, apparently, because in the religious tradition in which I was raised, you would expect your pastor to be outspoken because a pastor is a preacher. That's what we do. We're outspoken. I had a local pastor message me privately and say, I think I've been doing really good at not sharing my political opinions. And they were bragging on themselves and said they were doing good. And I didn't even shoot back at him, but I wanted to say, why, I agree. You've been adept at this, but I would phrase it like you're doing really bad at not sharing your opinions. That's a bad thing. And so if you're tempered by the word of God, if you know the scripture and you're not qualified to speak out, then who the heck is, if it's not our ministers? I mean, your job is to speak on behalf of God prophetically. Go speak on behalf of God. When I say prophetically, I don't mean telling the future like at Bethel Church, Redding, California or something. I don't mean Benny Hinn style. I just mean speaking the words of God from the scripture. And 7% of the churches in this country didn't close down when the government told them to. 7%. And I think that's about that's about right for the number of pastors who've yet to bend the knee to Baal and understand the difference between God and government.
Well, no, I mean, and a caller here, someone in the chat room brought up a really good point. I've seen the videos and I've heard the pastors talking about the clergy response teams, where when things break down, they've already got some pastors that are willing to step up and even in some video, a pastor interview, help lead their flocks to the FEMA camps. That's basically what they were saying. I mean, this is, I'm not joking. I can send you the video. If I can find it, I can send you the video of the pastor actually saying that he's going to help comfort his flocks and help him get on the buses to the FEMA camps. I'm blown away by it.
There's a documentary that I've been just providing some unofficial counsel to for a couple years called Enemies Within the Church. And the documentary will be released this year, hopefully. I think it's going to be released in 2 parts, but it's about how the Democratic Party has rented evangelicals to push Marxism within the church. And the number one offender, I've been chronicling it for at least 10 years. The number one offender in evangelicalism is the Southern Baptist Convention. What was revealed yesterday is that when they hosted a Martin Luther King 50 conference, which that's when my church left the denomination, merely because, not as though we have a problem with racial reconciliation, but Martin Luther King was a terrible human being. Can I say that on this program?
Say anything you like.
He was a straight up communist, and on a Christian level, and I understand this isn't a Christian program and lots of your listeners may disagree, but in my religious tradition, Jesus rose from the dead and he's the Son of God. And Martin Luther King did not believe Jesus rose again from the dead. He did not believe, Jesus is the Son of God. He didn't believe in the plenary inspiration of scripture. So when they pushed this social justice conference, we're out of here. We don't have tolerance for this. We just found out they got $50,000 from the Democracy Now! Fund. $50,000 handed to them for this conference from the founder of eBay, who a Muslim fellow, a Democrat. Right now you have the Southern Baptist president praising Joe Biden. The other day, the Southern Baptist president said, if all you care about is abortion, if all you talk about is abortion, but not empowering the poor, then you get your views, he said, more from Fox News than from the Holy Bible. And let's be honest, when he says empower the poor, he means socialism. And so the church has been a powerful vehicle to brainwash Americans. The pew has always been powerful.
Sure.
Excuse me, the pulpit. The pulpit's always been powerful in terms of changing the views in the pew. And frankly, there are a lot of pastors who are working for what is called the evangelical deep state. I mean, that's a term. Look it up. That was invented by my friend. That term was invented by my friend Tommy Littleton. There's an evangelical deep state that a lot of your pastors are a part of. And unfortunately, in Montana, we have a lot of graduates from Master's Seminary, for example, at Grace Bible Church in Bozeman, who have really turned on Dr. John MacArthur and are quislings and cowards who are rolling over and showing their soft underbelly to Caesar, to the government, saying, please take the keys of our church and tell us how to worship.
Well, no, I think what I think, you know, and someone brought, and I forget who brought this out here. What the conservative pastors and really what they really wanted was a seat at the table. That was always, we just want a seat at the table. Well, to get that seat at the table, they have had to give up an awful lot to get to that seat, to get to that seat at the table. And I submit to you, Jordan, you're preaching notwithstanding, the reason that we're in the problem, the trouble, one of the reasons that we're in the trouble that we're in this nation is the pastors of this country have failed us miserably, have miserably failed us. I mean, I'm not against people, you know, having, you know, personal gain and you know, having wealth. I mean, it's the love of money is the root of all evil, not money. And that's a misconception. But you have these pastors that have, you know, giant mansions and within a mile of their house, there's like homeless people sleeping on the street. They don't have food to eat, yet they've got a 40-bedroom home. And I think you know who I'm talking about here. This is we're in a time like no other. I believe that we're going to have a cleansing of the church here, and all these phony, fake, wannabe, so-called pastors are going to be weeded out. I mean, do you see that coming? I sure hope and pray that happens. Do you see us on the cusp of that, perhaps, Jordan?
Well, yeah, maybe not exactly the way that you described it going down, but I think that it's going down because what's happening is the pastors that are trying to play it safe so that they're not divisive in their congregation. And that's the key. That's the code word, being divisive. And so in the last 2 years, again, the Southern Baptists have been talking about making space for Democrats in your church, making space, making room for people who view, you know, politics differently. That's in order to keep lost people in their church, because that's who Democrats are. I mean, let's be honest. Democrats hate God. Their platform is a point-by-point refutation of the 10 Commandments. You know, not stealing, not murdering, not coveting. Those are things that the Democrat Party is built around. I mean, the 7th Commandment violations, and the celebration of the LGBT, the violation of the 6th Commandment, murder when it comes to abortion, class warfare, class greed, class envy. That's all a violation of the 10th Commandment. So they want to make room essentially for lost people who vote Democrat in the church. Well, what that's doing is that's actually running off the legitimate Christians in the church who are saying to themselves, I'm not going to hear this crap on Sunday morning. This is garbage. You're wanting the sheep to make room for goats. And this is not a goat herd. This is a flock of sheep theoretically here. And so they're leaving those churches, draining them of authentic Christians. Now, the good news for churches like mine is that those Christians are showing up somewhere, and they're trying to find good churches. And we can rest assured in the eschatological promises given to us by Christ that the gates of hell won't prevail against the church. God will always have his remnant and have his elect. And we're just going to have to see some churches close down. And by the way, here's my thought. If your church closed down during coronavirus because you apparently were not offering essential services, don't open again. Just stay closed. It'll make the world a better place. You know, I don't know if I've told you this before, Jordan, but my wife ran into one of the bigger churches around here, ran into the secretary there somewhere, I think in Holly Lobby or something, and started talking about the church. And my wife said, well, how come the pastor doesn't really talk about hell and sin? They don't really hear him saying about, well,
Well, people don't want to come if he starts talking like that. We lose people, and we just want to bring as many people in as we can. So when he starts talking like that, we notice that a lot of people don't like that. So and I'm like, that's exactly the reason, right? It's a problem right there. It's the tickle in the ears, man. It's the tickle in the ears. Go ahead. No, you got to comment on that.
Well, I was asked by a church of a different denomination to come help them select a new pastor a few years ago. And it wasn't my faith tradition or anything. And I've criticized this church in the past because they've been incredibly liberal. And I asked them the question. I was like, why are you having me come sift through the resumes of your next pastor? Like, I'm flattered. I'll be happy to try to find you a good pastor instead of a lesbian this time. But what? I'm not making that up. Why me? And they said, well, none of us are believers. We don't know what we're supposed to be believing. We're not Christians. And I'm like, what? Your church board's not Christians? He's like, no. I'm like, why are you there? Why do you even go? And he was saying, well, it's a homestead mentality. It's Eastern Montana, North Dakota. You go to church. It's just what you do. It's an avenue to serve the community. You serve on the board for a few years. You're an adult. You give back to the community. So when somebody says, well, we don't want to run those people off, what you're saying is, first of all, you don't believe in the power of God, the Holy Spirit, and your pneumatology sucks. That's what that's saying. Because what we believe as Christians is that we're born again by hearing the word of God. So whereas the word of God will run off some people who consider it foolishness, that preaching, to some it's the power of God into salvation, chiefly those who he's saving. So the expression is the same sun that hardens the clay is the same sun that melts the ice. So yes, this preaching will run off certain people. I've literally had people leave my church screaming like they could not stand what they heard me say. Like first-time visitors, they didn't know what to expect. And I preach something, I don't know what it is, they don't like it. They go out in the parking lot screaming on the way to the car. I've had it happen. But those who are being saved by God, those who are being drawn in the Spirit, they say, well, I've never heard anything like that in my life. That was fantastic. Well, that's because Jesus preached in John 10, my sheep know my voice, they hear my voice, and they follow me. And so point. If you're just trying to fit as many lost people into a building on Sunday morning as possible, like Narrate Church in Helena, like that's the goal. How many lost people can we fit into this building right now? Then that's not a church. Call it something else.
Well, and then you have the whole class of the 4 or 5 or 6 biggest donors that have the ear of the pastor. And if they don't want something preached about, the pastor doesn't preach about it because he doesn't want to lose his big donors. I mean, this is the state of the modern clergy these days, or modern pastorhood, or shepherds, if we want to call it. So we haven't had a chance here to talk about the Pope since you've been on last. The Pope has come out, and we got a lot of good Catholics, a lot of good people. I think I don't practice Catholicism, but that doesn't mean that there's not good people that are doing it. But the Pope's come out now and saying, I believe he's jumped on top of the LGBT bandwagon, saying that it's okay. My Bible says that it's abomination to the Lord, but the Pope is saying that it's okay. They deserve to have a life too, and let's just accept them, and everything's okay, and let's all just have popcorn and cotton candy and hug each other. I mean, can you comment on this? This is misleading people, tragically misleading people, is it not?
Well, that expression when we were kids, if you wanted to say yes, you'd answer answer the question, is the Pope Catholic? It's kind of like, does a bear poop in the woods? And now when you say, is the Pope Catholic, you legitimately have to go, I don't know. Is he Catholic? So, Pope Francis from South America, first of all, he's the first Jesuit.
Yeah, the Jesuit, yeah.
He's the first Jesuit Pope in centuries, or it might be ever.
Maybe ever, I think. Yeah.
The first one from South America as well. But what makes the Catholic teaching in South America unique compared to what you'll find in Europe is that it is tainted with liberation theology. And liberation theology was contrived when in 1959, the Soviets made a deal with Cuba, and the Cuban Revolution happened. And the South American Catholics were absolutely convinced that communism would invade South America through Cuba, and the communists would kill them all, because communism is not a friend of faith at all. And so the Catholics thought really long and hard about how can we survive Marxism? How can we survive communism if it invades our continent? And it partially did, of course, if you know much of your history from the 1970s and 80s. Well, they invented a theology that says the point of the gospel and the point of the Bible is for God to identify with the oppressed and the marginalized. So what they did was they created a unique theology that could embrace Marxism. Well, Marxism is opposed to the scripture because the seventh commandment says, thou shalt not steal.
Right.
And Marxism is built upon theft as a virtue that says you have no right to private property. You can take from one another. You can covet their property. You can take their stuff so long as there's more of us than there is of them, pitting the oppressed against the oppressor, the marginalized against the, the victor, the proletariat against the bourgeoisie. So you have all of that stuff going on in this South American version of Catholicism, and that's from where the Pope comes. So when the Pope says these things and he's jumping way off the ship of Roman Catholic so-called orthodoxy, you got to understand that's actually the least of his problems. One of the greatest issues he has is that he's a communist. He's a straight up Marxist. And if you follow anything that Pope Francis teaches, you would know that he thinks that wealth is sin, that having money means that you are greedy, that you should hand over your wealth. Well, the Roman Catholic Church has about $2 billion just sitting in the bank account and close to $100 billion in assets around the world. One would think the quickest way to alleviate poverty would be to melt down some of those golden images and give that to the poor. But you know how Marxists work. They're fine with money for them. They just want to split up everybody else's cash.
That's great.
amongst
That's great. I'm gonna pull that clip out. That's great. Folks, you want to call in and talk to JD Hall, you can call in at 563-999-3617. 563-999-3617. If you have a question about Romans 13 or about what he just talked about with the Catholic Church, feel free to call in. Jordan, let people know out there, because everybody's not by Sydney, of course, that are listening to this program. They don't have the benefit of visiting a Bible-believing, Bible-preaching church like yours. What can people do if a lot of new people are moving to Montana? Lots of new people are moving to Montana. They're going to be going to looking for churches. Can you give people some insights? It's not, of course, not all inclusive across the board, but what are some key things when people are looking for a new church? Questions they can ask the pastor. What do they need to look for to get an idea? I mean, of course, you kind of know.
Yeah, that's good. And as we're bashing on clergy that need to be bashed on a little bit, let me say I'm aware of a good church in almost every town in Montana. Names came to my head like Matt Davis over Reformed Baptist Church in Helena, Joseph Moyer's church in Great Falls, Kevin Lackey's church in Shelby, Redemption Church, Missoula. I mean, there are good churches out there. But the first question I would ask is, did you close for COVID? That's the first question. Secondly, why? So if they closed because they were convinced this really is a super deadly disease, I think that makes sense. But if they closed because they said the government said to, okay, that's a warning sign. And then you need to ask the question, would you do it again? Because I'm aware that there were some churches that made this decision, and then since then, having considered it, said we will not do that again. Those are questions that should be asked. I think you should, and I've been telling people this for years, ask the question if they do church discipline. In other words, if someone's acting like a lost pagan, do you let them get by with that? Or will you address that through a Matthew 18 type process so that they stop behaving like an ungodly pagan? Because if I wanted to go to church with a bunch of, homosexuals and whoremongers, I'd go down to the ELCA. Like, that's not where I'm going to church at. So I want to be with Christians, and we reach the lost, but we understand there's a dividing line, a distinction between what it means to be a follower of Christ and what Charles Spurgeon would call a worldling, someone who belongs to the world. And that's just the basic concept of Christian holiness. And I always want to tell people, if you're looking for a good church, I would encourage you to check out the directories. I'm just going to name them real fast, and you may have to press, rewind and play. But the National Council of Family Integrated Churches has a good directory. It's called the NCFIC. ARBCA, the Association of Reformed Baptist Churches in America. Typically, those won't bend the knee to Baal as quickly as others. FIRE, the Fellowship of Independent Reformed Evangelicals, illbehonest.com, and Founders Friendly Churches. Those are pretty good directories for you to check and find out where a good church is.
So I noticed in the criteria, and this is other Black Road preachers have preached about the 501c3. I noticed that wasn't part of your criteria. Is the 501c3 that sometimes that is a criteria of some of the Patriot pastors, that if your church is a 501c3,
I differ with Pastor Chuck Baldwin on the 501c3 thing. So let me explain the origins of that if I can. The origin is simple, and it goes back to the Bible, and it's the lesser cannot tax the greater. Okay, so you pay taxes to Caesar because Caesar is over you. Caesar doesn't pay taxes to you. You pay taxes to Caesar. Well, the government should not tax God. That's the basic premise. The government does not tax God. God is the greater. Government is the lesser. We have to get things right in this country. God comes first. Government comes second. So when you give money to the church, that's as though you're giving it to the Lord. That's the principle, because the church is the body of Christ. Christ is the head, if you can see that picture. So it's like giving to Christ. That's not the government's money. I have decided to give this to the Lord. This is the Lord's money. Don't tax me on what I give to the Lord. So what you give to a church should not be taxed. And furthermore, what the church has should not be taxed. It should be tax exempt. I think the notion is, among those who oppose a 501c3, is that you have to make certain political concessions and compromises in order to have it. For example, the church itself cannot endorse a candidate. I would say, I think I would rank among the most or the more outspoken pastors, probably. And I'd ask you the question, does it seem as though a 501c3 is keeping me from speaking freely? It has not yet. The moment it does, I'll surrender it. But in the meantime, I'm really enjoying the fact that I don't have to pay taxes on what I give to the Lord out of my income, and the church doesn't have to pay taxes because, well, why should they? They're a nonprofit. They, and they're serving the community and they're serving the Lord.
One of the things, and I get a question about children. Well, I'll ask you that first. At what age? I don't know. I haven't been to your church here. I plan on going here in the spring after the thaw here. I'm going to head out there. It's a ways away. It's like 12 hours away to get there. That's okay. I'll come there, spend a couple days, and go to hear you preach. What's your stance on children? Some people don't go to churches because there's no children's area. There's no what they call it preschool. They call it Sunday school. There's no Sunday school. Sometimes churches have children like right up in the main auditorium during that, when the preacher's preaching during the actual sermon. What is your thoughts on that, Jordan, as far as your church is concerned? Do you have an area for children in Sunday school? And then at what age do you recommend that they advance back up to the main area for the main preaching?
Well, so if anyone wants to know my philosophy or view, there's a movie on YouTube you can watch for free called Divided the Movie. But the premise is real simple, and that is 80% of our kids leave church when they're 18 and don't go back. And that's not because they really left church. That's because they were never a part of the church to begin with. So as soon as they come into the church, when they're born, somebody rips them out of their mom's arms, puts them in nursery. Then they go to pre-K, then they go to Sunday school, then they go to youth group, then they go to college age. And then if they're still around, they can eventually go to the adult class. And then we may even segregate them further. We may do men over here, women over here, or divorced over here. So we're separating our church. And then within the church, you've got 8 or 10 different churches that are all acting independently of one another. But the principle that we see in Titus 2 is that the old and the young should be there learning together. And in the Old Testament, when they stood before God in the minor prophets, it says they were there, men, women, children, and breastfeeding babe, listening to God's word be read line by line and precept by precept. And so the principle is we should stop dividing our church into 100 different small groups. So like we have a nursery because sometimes kids are just having a terrible day. And also a lot of folks that visit our church have never had to make their kids be still, ever. And so they may not be ready to sit with their kids. So we have a nursery and we have a cry room where parents can still listen and see what's going on, but they can discipline their kid or comfort their kid, depending upon which is needed. But we don't do youth group. We do Sunday school, but we make sure that the teachers are only reinforcing what the parents have first taught them to send the message to the families. It's not the church's job to religiously educate your children. It's your job to religiously educate your children. And, one of the directories I gave out, the first one was the National Council of Family Integrated Churches. And so the more your kids can be involved, the better. And we say things like, a child just can't sit and be still for an hour. Poppycock, they go to school 5 days a week and they sit there for 7 hours still, and they learn and listen. And so a child of the youngest age can sit there with a little bit of discipline and get something out of it. But even if it's over their head, here's what's not over their head. Their daddy is with their mommy and they're sitting together, and daddy is singing. Daddy is praying. Daddy's reading his Bible when the preacher is speaking, to be a good Berean and all that. And that's what they're picking up on, even if they may not be able to understand the 5-point sermon alliteration that the pastor just gave from the book of Habakkuk.
Folks, 563-999-3617, 563-999-3617. If you have a question for Jordan Hall, feel free to call into the show. What I'm hearing, Jordan, is that this whole locking down the churches, like it always does, anytime you try to censor a YouTube video, next thing you know, it's got 10 million views, right? Same thing's happening, I believe, here. I'm understanding with the church, and you can certainly attest to that better than me. This whole attempt to lock down the churches and keep people from going to church, I think it's had the opposite effect. I'm understanding that there's churches that are getting people coming that they have never seen before, and their attendance is in some areas surging, because it's how funny how life is. Like, people don't really motivate and act on things until they realize that it may be gone, or they may lose it, and then it becomes dear to them, it becomes precious to them, and then they're willing to fight for it. Have you seen that, Jordan? Have you seen an uptick overall in attendance, or the fellow pastors you've talked to? Do you see sort of a resurgence of the people, the part-time Christians coming back to church more regular?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, back when we thought that COVID was really deadly, we met outside for like a month or 6 weeks or something. I preached in the back of my pickup truck, but we still had church. Just outside, and people could listen via their FM, because that was, it was cold back in March and April. And
it's not about the building. It's not about the building. It's not about the structure.
It's not about the building. It's about the gathering. And what people will say is, in defense of internet church, they'll say, well, you don't have to have a building to worship. And then my question is, then why aren't you worshiping? Why aren't you gathering without a building? Go meet in a field. It doesn't matter, but it is a gathering. I mean, we're to sing to one another psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. There's a limit to what can be done virtually, and you can't observe the Lord's Supper via video. Well, unless your ecclesiology is pretty awful, you just can't do that. But we saw people show up those first couple of weeks just because they were told they can't go to church by the governor. Now, I haven't seen them born again yet, but hopefully, our church has picked up a number of families since it began, because their church closed and they thought that they weren't pleased with that decision. I'll put it that way. I saw an article from Lifeway Christian Resources the other day, it was last week before, that said only 10% of the churches in the country have shown stable attendance, or whose attendance now is at pre-COVID levels. Only 10%. I got to be honest, I think that's about the same 10% that didn't close down for COVID. I think everyone else is suffering on account of that. I mean, the president of the Southern Baptist Convention, his church won't be open until at least January. Andy Stanley's big mega church won't be open until at least January. And they use this as a means to brag. This is how much we're loving our neighbor. We're loving our, it's like casinos are open. Planned Parenthood is open. Planned Parenthood has the guts to go down, even though in some states they shut down the abortion clinics during the heat of COVID. Planned Parenthood didn't listen to any of that. Planned Parenthood kept killing babies no matter what the governor said. If we could only have as much fortitude and courage when it comes to worshiping the God of the universe as what abortionists have to killing babies, that'd be great. The problem is Christians like Andy Stanley or J.D. Greear don't have the same ambition and drive to worship God as what Planned Parenthood has to murder babies.
Yeah, but you know, that's boy, I tell you, we got a couple of gems in this interview, Jordan. That's for sure. Can you hang around for a minute here? I want to hit some of the articles here on Montana Daily Gazette. You got a minute to hit a couple of those? You got to go.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
So let's hit the first one here. Just published this here earlier. It looks like the largest entertainment company is going to require vaccine papers for public events. Live Nation Entertainment, which of course owns Ticketmaster, they're working on a plan to use smartphones to verify whether customers have been vaccinated or tested for coronavirus, and they're also going to share that information with partners and partners, whoever those are, and they're going to require people to have, I guess, their papers before they can go to these concerts. It enrages me that they come up and the vaccines, whether you like vaccines or not, they aren't even able to be distributed widely yet, first of all. Second of all, I don't think they've even been tested properly. I mean, you know, in real humans, people are dropping off in South Korea. They're dropping off 100 people have already died from the flu vaccine just this year. I think this is preposterous. Jordan, any thoughts on it?
Yeah. If you inject something into your body without fully knowing what it is, without it having been vetted, it's a bad decision. At least that's what my middle school guidance counselors taught us. Don't put things in your body, you know, experimental drugs. Don't experiment with drugs, right? But secondly, if you take a vaccine for something that's not a deadly disease for you, you've got a certain malfunction that is hard to pin down. Vaccines are for deadly diseases. I have COVID right now, like right now. I'm okay. I've had a rough couple days. I can't go to church this Sunday. It's first time won't be in church in, I don't know, ever. So that stinks, but does it look like I'm dying? Why would you take a vaccine for a cold? It doesn't make any sense. But what's particularly scary about Ticketmaster is that it shows that with the technocracy in place, it doesn't matter if the government forces vaccines. If all of these various companies that control our lives are forcing us to do the vaccines. That's the scary thing. Listen, what we're against, Jim, me and you, we're against tyrants, right? But it doesn't matter to us if it's a tyrant in Washington, D.C., or if it's a tyrant in Menlo Park, California, which is the headquarters of Facebook. I don't care if it's Joe Biden trying to run my life and tell me what to do, or if it's Ticketmaster, right? If my employer demands that I get a vaccine, does it make a difference to me that it's not the government making me get a vaccine? I mean, what I want here is bodily autonomy. And I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I do think it's really stupid to take a vaccine for something that's probably not going to kill you, because in terms of cost benefit analysis, it doesn't make any sense. Like, you're the lab rat. We all understand this, right? Like, it's called Operation Warp Speed. It's like anyone who thinks, hey, let's put a vaccine together by seeing how quickly we can do it, how fast we can get it on the market. You're the lab rat. If you want to be a lab rat, that's on you. Just don't make me become one.
Yeah, but good point. How long before it's going to be the gas station? Before you go to the gas station, you got to flash your thing across the there are all these scanners on the pumps. How long before you have to go? You go to the grocery store and you have to have this before you can even buy groceries. You know, it reminds me of the Chinese. The Chinese score, social credit system that they had, where everybody's got a social credit score, and you can't even operate really if you don't have a high enough social credit score. And if you talk to someone that has a lower credit score than you, social credit score, then that lowers your score. I mean, this is Chinese style. I mean, but the side note here, but I think the Chinese Communist Party has way more influence in America's society today that anybody even realizes. I don't even think they realize because our mostly so-called leaders have been sold out. They've sold out. They sold out to these people. And I think that, this is I don't think patriots are going to put up with this, Jordan. I got a video at the end of that article there. If you guys want to check it out over at Montana Daily Gazette, I got about 16 or 17 current either they're either in right now the Montana legislature or will be assuming that role in 2021 that have come out and stated by no means will they stand behind any law, any ordinance, any push to mandatory vaccinate people. And that's really what we need. It's not the Supreme Court. We need our local legislators are the one that make the laws. The government doesn't make the laws. The courts don't make the laws. Our legislature makes the laws. And that's who we have to get behind and we have to influence. That's my view anyway. Any thoughts on that?
Well, there's a pervasive ignorance today as to what a law is. And we've covered it at the Montana Daily Gazette. These health officials, it was in Lewistown. The health officer in Lewistown had done an interview for the ABC News affiliate here in Montana. And she said, what makes Governor Bullock's order a law is that it's a direct order. And I know,
I remember that. I'm trying to find that.
When I was in high school, I had to pass a Constitution test to graduate. Is that not a thing anymore?
I don't know. I'm trying to find that article.
We should make. How's this for a resolution that we should get passed in the we can have a lot of fun this legislative session. I think, Jim, if we Republicans get our act together. How about this? How about we make anyone receiving state of Montana money of any kind in their paycheck pass a Constitution test in order to be employed?
I like that.
If you want to be employed by the state of Montana, you have to pass a Constitution test.
Yeah, that's a good plan. I think there'd be a lot fewer legislators. I think this is one of the things you're talking. I think it's what you're talking about here, Jordan. I think this is the one, maybe not, but this is the one where they in Yellowstone County, where they forcibly removed that guy from the football game for not having a mask, and he was outside, away from everybody, and they came and basically escorted him out of the place. But I don't think that's the one.
Well, that was pervasive ignorance on the part of the Yellowstone sheriff's deputy.
Yeah,
and also the activities director, who said 6 or 7. I was trying to keep track. 6 or 7. Factually incorrect things.
Yes.
When escorting the man from the property.
I saw that.
But no, I'm speaking of, I think it was the woman Debbie Westlake had to deal with.
Oh, wow. Okay.
In the Central Montana Health District. And it was the most ignorant remarks I'd ever heard come out of a public official, but she said them to ABC News and is quoted in an article. And you would think that her supervisor, someone would bring her in and say, listen, you have got to have more than a second grade understanding of civics to have a job like this one where you're going to tell people what to do.
There it is. I think that's
Spry.
It right there. Anybody not in compliance with that direct is in violation of the law, essentially because they are in violation of a direct order. So that's what makes the mandate a law. And didn't you say somewhere down in the article you stated you made a proclamation and told her to follow you, didn't you? Because
right, I gave her a direct order in the Montana Daily Gazette. So that's a direct order. Now, by the way, if we could circle back around to Romans 13,
yeah,
we want to ask the question of Governor Bullock, where do you have the jurisdictional authority to require face masks or if he had been in there much longer, mandatory vaccines? Where do you get the jurisdictional authority? We'd have to ask the question of what is his jurisdictional authority? For example, yesterday, the judge ruled there in the Flathead, right, that those 5 businesses would not have to enforce Bullock's order. The judge made a decision. This is not the jurisdictional power of the government. And because we have a separation of powers, understanding the concept of jurisdictions, a judge could be able to overrule the governor or the Montana DPHHS in that regard. This is the same question we have to ask in regard to Romans 13. When you look at government authority, if they have the legitimate authority in their legitimate jurisdiction, then we should submit to them so long as they're not asking us to disobey God. So if Joe Biden is the president because Wisconsin and Michigan and Arizona and Pennsylvania and Georgia, all these get wrapped up, the lawsuits are over. The judges have decided if it goes to the Supreme Court or whatever court is the final court to have a say. If it turns out that Joe Biden, according to the electors of those states, says that he's won, then there should be a peaceful transition of power, and we should obey that which President, quote unquote, President Biden would have us do, so long as he's acting within his constitutional jurisdiction and not telling us to disobey God.
Right. Right. Just because if the government tells you to go punch your neighbor in the mouth, there's a higher authority in place here than your government. And that says, God's law of don't harm your neighbor. I mean, that's not God's law, but you know what I'm saying? Don't harm your neighbor. I mean, that supersedes it. And that's the next question I was going to ask you about that. You brought it up, that's just a recent article published there. They looks like the judges stood up here in Flathead Valley, and there was some really high quality businessmen here. And here, the funny thing about all the people that Bullock went after, they were all conservatives, I do believe. So one of the biggest conservative contributors in the whole Flathead Valley, went after him and his shop. So I think it was a victory for liberty yesterday with the judge stepping up, and I think that should be a model for all these judges. The governor doesn't make laws. The governor does not make the law. I mean, he's had a certain amount of period for emergency powers, but that's very limited. I think it's like 30 days. And then it has to go before the legislature. I don't know exact, to the letter, but he doesn't have the authority to give sweeping mask mandates all across forever and like they want to do. And this great reset, Jordan, that's another thing. And we're almost out of time here, but that's what they're trying. This great reset. You hear that now, this great reset. This is really, we're at a crossroads. I mean, I really firmly believe we're at a crossroads in this nation and in humanity. We're either going to go towards the path of liberty and truthfulness and the path that leads towards our Creator, or we're going to be in the deepest, darkest tyranny that we could have imagined. Do you see this being that dire, or you think I'm off base on that a little bit? Yeah, be honest with me. It's okay. We think differently. I'm a little bit more radical than you are. Believe it or not, I'm a little bit more radical than you in some areas.
Predictions are best left to prophets, and I'm not one. But thankfully, my eschatology tells me a few different things. How God's going to wrap this world up, and thankfully, we know that it's optimistic. That God will win eventually, but there might be hard times between here and there. If this is not one of those hard times that is, quote, between here and there, I would be surprised. And whether, the media has everyone convinced that Joe Biden has absolutely won this race. I believe that's for a reason. And that's because they want the nation to burn down if that were undone. When you just tell people matter of factly, he is the president elect. If the courts were to determine differently and fraud was taken into account, you realize that all these relatively low information people who listen to you, they're going to think that the election was stolen, when in fact it was not stolen. It's just that it wasn't won. If that's what ends up happening, and they don't have to worry about conservatives burning things down. We only have to worry about liberals burning things down. Conservatives don't behave that way. We're not riotous. So I don't know what the future holds, but man, am I sure glad that God's in charge of it. But as I said earlier in the program, just because God is sovereign doesn't mean that we don't have a lot of work to do.
Well, we're just coming towards what a great interview. A couple of gems, Jordan, you pulled off that interview. That was great. A couple of those things were great. Where do you want to send people? I know you have multiple different websites that you manage, not just the
Let's just tell them to go look at the Montana Daily Gazette, montanadailygazette.com. And especially if you are going to be in Helena, if you're a legislator, if you're an influencer, if you're a newsmaker, if you're an organizer or an activist, be in regular contact with us and send us your news stories.
Right, and that gives us a good chance here to talk about real quick. We can really hit this real quick before we go and talk about this if you can. I brought it up on the show a couple of times. We are opening up the applications for a statewide Advisory Board. Talk about that if you can before to close out the show here. This 2021 statewide editorial advisory board, and they need to send you an email if they're interested at jordan@gideonknox.com. What kind of things can people expect if they're named to the 2021 editorial board for Montana Daily Gazette?
We're going to give them a special portal to drop their insights, their news tips. Basically, they'll have access to the publishing team at Montana Daily Gazette that nobody else has, so that if you want something covered, you can say, please cover this. We work for you. And it will allow them to stay in close contact with us and make sure that we don't miss some good news stories.
Right on. Jordan Hall, thanks so much. I love your hat, dude. Great job on the hat.
It's a great hat.
Appreciate it, man. And so I hope you have a blessed rest of your day. I hope you're feeling better. Hope you recover well from COVID. Looks like you're well in that way. And we so much appreciate you coming on, man, laying out truth for us here on the show. Always great to have you, Jordan. Thanks a million, brother.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, We'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Yep.
All right, folks, there goes Jordan Hall. Check out what he's got going on over at Montana Daily Gazette. He's written a lot of articles over there, and I'm the editor there now. But he certainly is still doing some of that until I can fully assume that role. And we're in a transition right now, but we do appreciate you checking things out over at MontanaDailyGazette.com, MontanaDailyGazette.com. We're just out of time here on this broadcast. We so much appreciate you joining us today. You can support us by going to MontanaGazetteRadio.com, MontanaDailyGazette.com, or of course the powerhouse, or I should say the flagship, Northwest Liberty News. That's Northwest Liberty News. We, again, thanks so much for our guest today, Gene Pringle. He'll be back in 2 weeks. If you're interested in his information about taxes, go check out his website at uncommonconsultant.org, uncommonconsultant.org, if you want to find out more about that. And next Friday, we'll have Ron Gibson back, and we're going to be talking about probably more than one of the things that has been, one of the shows that has been really, people are calling me, wanting me to have him redo the 12 presumptions of the court. And I never even heard about him until he came here and laid them all out. But he's going to be here next week. Ron Gibson's going to lay out the 12 presumptions of the court once again. Don't miss that show, because you're going to be shocked, folks, with what the stuff that you don't even really know that this in place. When you go into court, they usually, all the advantages are against you, man. It's all against you. But check that out next week. We'll be back for a broadcast likely tomorrow with Pam Olson for the critical disclosure broadcast. Check my YouTube channel or Blog Talk for those showtimes. We certainly, again, appreciate you looking in. We want to thank our guests, Gene Pringle and Jordan Hall, for a couple of great interviews. Please support this program or support any independent news. If it's not me, find someone that's putting out truth and support them, because they certainly need it. Thanks so much for all you listeners here. Thanks so much for the chat room. Till next time, James White for Montana Gazette Radio, saying bye now.